A number of different things I'd like to say before I start. Once again, identifying the Spartan in the room. Thank you for rival institution from Michigan, because I come from the real CMU, who's at Michigan University that was existed before you. But yes, I have to say, you have the better football team, and you also have the better archives. If anyone ever gets a chance to go to Michigan State University to do some research, the special collections there, I could spend an entire life there in that basement. It's fantastic. So for somebody else knowing that, that is wonderful. I would also like to thank everyone for having the Dixie State Chapter of Phi Alpha Theta here. We are, what are we, 2 weeks old now? And we just had our induction ceremony because we've only recently gotten university status, and it's very exciting because it wasn't that long ago that I was going to Phi Alpha Theta conferences as a student, and now being chair of the Department of History and Political Science and bringing a generation of students here, particularly since my next one I'll be mentoring here and get him to eventually be Dr. Camargo as well. Yeah. The presentation I'd like to give today, I'd like to start off saying what I'm going to do and what inspires this. I'm going to talk about the pink elephant. Because when I moved from Michigan to southern Utah, one of the very first things that academics said to me over and over and over, they said, there's certain sort of cultural norms here and different things, and whatever you do, don't question it, don't touch it, just don't even address that there's Mormons in the room. And that there are Jack Mormons in the room who are really angry and bitter, and there's FLDS in the room, and all sorts of different groups. And they said, just pretend this doesn't exist. I'm like, well, that doesn't sound like a university or an education. And so what I've done, my entire career at Dixie so far, I've been quite successful with it. I always talk about the pink elephant in the room, but I do it in a constructive way, not to try to change anyone's values, but to assist them in the process of criticism. What I'd like to start off with here before we introduce our main antagonist, Glenn Beck, is with a short film clip from a movie that was released about 10 years ago. It's about 3 minutes. It's a comedy. There's a few risque words, but I think you will immediately catch on what the point is that I'm trying to get at. Because you've all encountered this.
As the 21st century began, human evolution was at a turning point. Natural selection, the process by which the strongest, the smartest, the fastest reproduced in greater numbers than the rest, a process which had once favored the noblest traits of man, now began to favor different traits. Most science fiction of the day predicted a future that was more civilized and more intelligent. But as time went on, things seemed to be heading in the opposite direction, a dumbing down. How did this happen? Evolution does not necessarily reward intelligence. With no natural predators to thin the herd, it began to simply reward those who reproduced the most and left the intelligent to become an endangered species.
Having kids is such an important decision.
We're just waiting for the right time. It's not something you want to rush into, obviously.
No way.
Oh shit, I'm pregnant again!
Too many damn kids! I just want to kill some shit!
Hell no!
Must have been thinking of Brittany.
Brittany! No, get There's no way we could have a child now. Not with the market the way it is now.
That just wouldn't make any sense.
We don't care about you. Yeah, well, there must be something he likes over here. Well, we finally decided to have children, and I'm not pointing fingers, but it's not going well.
And this is helping.
I'm just saying that before I have in vitro, maybe you should be willing to...
It's always me, right?
Well, it's not my sperm count.
Cleavon is lucky to be alive.
He attempted to jump a jet ski from a lake into a swimming pool and impaled his crotch on an iron gate. But thanks to recent advances in stem cell research and the fine work of Drs. Krinsky and Altshuler, Cleavon should regain full reproductive function.
Dragons on my junk!
Unfortunately, Trevor passed away from a heart attack while masturbating to produce sperm for artificial insemination. But I have some eggs frozen, so just as soon as the right guy comes along,
And so it went for generations, although few if any seemed to notice.
Now that we've identified a larger phenomenon in terms of the peak elephant in the room, I think even though we've all witnessed this, it's uncomfortable to talk about because particularly historians, even though we don't buy into a lot of mythology, we like to think that our own discipline helps in the progress of humanity. And as we see a digress in certain areas, it freaks us out a little bit and we just tend to just keep talking about the past. Prior to coming to Utah, these were the two great problems I had to encounter in the classroom with students when it came down to motivation and critical thought. Was their great heroes were two cartoon characters who had a very different concept of the world around them than I had been growing up with. Homer Simpson and Peter Griffin. Homer stating, Lisa, if you don't like your job, you don't strike, you just do it every day in a really half-assed way. That's the American way. And then, of course, Peter Griffin. Yes, I believe everything everyone tells me all of the time. And what I used to encounter with this in Michigan was, students that they just not only didn't put much effort into it, but they didn't put much thought into it. If it popped up on a Google search, whatever the first answer was, they said, oh, that might be the right answer.
That's because history has been changed.
And then I moved to Utah.
That's why my eyebrows raised when I heard Michelle Obama say that we needed to change our history. What does this mean, America?
As a country. And Barack knows that we are going to have to make sacrifices. We are going to have to change our conversation. We're going to have to change our traditions, our history. We're going to have to move into a different place as a nation to provide the kind of future that we all want desperately for our children.
Why would we have to change our history? Why would we have to change our traditions? I like our traditions.
What I tried to emphasize, the way that I realized of the influence of Glenn Beck in my own particular community, I was aware that Glenn is an adult convert to the LDS Church. I was always aware of that. But part of the particularly prevailing culture within Utah, within Mormons, is a sort of inherent trust in your fellow Mormon. They're a good, upright person, as the Mormons say, chooses the right, and you can trust on a number of issues. And I didn't quite realize the influence this man had. On my very first day in class, I walked in, and I just handed out the syllabus, and there was a gentleman who was about 75 years old who was auditing the class. And he saw on the syllabus that I was using Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States. And he immediately stood up and said, nobody in this room listen to a single thing this man has to say. He is a communist agitator who is out to destroy America. And I said, number one, sir, the rules that apply to a 16-year-old in this class also apply to you. This is inappropriate behavior. I said, number two, if you go the next step down, you will realize I'm also using Larry Schweikert's A Patriot's History of the United States. I said, we look at different things to promote critical thought because both of these people have PhDs, they're both professional historians, but since they use different primary documents and come from different viewpoints, they both tell true stories, but very different stories. And yeah, it was awkward because he said that he had learned about Howard Zinn from seeing Glenn Beck denounce Howard Zinn over and over on his show. I was like, I'm going to have to figure out how to deal with this every semester.
You have to come to your own conclusions about our history with facts. Read original sources whenever you can. I'm convinced when you see the original words of people like Margaret Sanger or George Washington, when you see the facts, the evidence is overwhelming. But either way, you've got to look at history. because you're not getting the complete truth.
As we all know, when it comes to the historic profession, primary documents are one of the essential tools of the trade. It's our foundation, our building blocks, along with secondary sources. But we're also well aware that a primary document, if you do not understand the historic context, can oftentimes be meaningless, or if somebody else has introduced the document and the reader doesn't know the context, it can have a loaded agenda. And it's very difficult when Glenn tells my students, because I actually have them watch clips of these videos to try to promote critical thought, and afterwards they're like, I was so inspired by that, and you know what, I'm just going to read primary documents from now on. I'm like, well, I said, let's use an example of this. Particularly for young kids who like to just look things up on them. I said, here are some quotes from a primary document, and apparently you don't need secondary sources or context. I say, I believe today that my conduct is in accordance to the will of the Almighty Creator. I am defending the handiwork of the Lord. Once again, the strains of patriotic songs soared upward in the heavens as the Lord smiled on his children. We are men and women filled with an ardent love for country and a passionate spirit of national patriotism. We shall not lie and we shall not cheat. And when my students read these, they say, I think I like that. And they're quite intrigued by it because it resonates with them. But I give them the context. Now here's our challenge with this generation of students. More and more, as we get addicted to these lit up rectangles,